Everybody, today we're going to be talking about progress versus process. And this isn't specific to marketing, even though most of my blogs are, but it really does affect marketing in a lot of ways. And it's something that I've fought against a lot in my career. Not fought against, I guess that's not a really good term. I think the better one is that it's something that's always in conflict. Do you want progress or do you want process? Sometimes you can have this, progress with process, but a lot of times what I find is that process gets in the way of progress. And there's a conflict always occurring, especially as you look at companies in terms of their size on and how big they're getting and in scalability. So, and what I'm not trying to say that you can't have, if you want to have progress, you can't have process. Like, I am a person who loves process. I love putting processes in place. I love knowing that when I am working with a client and we're trying to implement some services or some projects and things like that, process really has a place in those instances. But there's a lot of things that companies need to take into account when they're putting a process in place. And where I'm coming from is I've worked at small companies, startups that didn't have a lot of process. I helped put processes in place. And then I've been at really large companies where you couldn't walk 5 feet without tripping over a process. And sometimes you weren't just tripping on the process, you were tripping over the whole thing trying to get to where you're trying to go, and you're not making progress. So what I've seen is that sometimes there's process for process sake. And the example that I like to use is that when I have been at one of the largest companies that I've worked at, if we were trying to get something out in market, if we were trying to get a campaign launched or a press release done, or any sort of thing that needed to be external facing, there was a ton of process in place. Even onboarding a vendor that we needed to use because they were a strategic differentiator for us in the market. A lot of times we would run into these obstacles where we just could not do what we needed to do in order to be first to market, to get that first mover's advantage, to be able to cast a wide net and get our audience looking at this thing that we were trying to put out in the market, that would make a very huge revenue impact for us. So those processes, I do see them having value and adding to what we should be doing. You don't want people putting stuff out that is misrepresenting the brand, or not getting the right approvals and putting the messages out that could hurt what we're doing from a business perspective. But at the same time, there's got to be some balance in the process versus progress conversation. And so what I'm suggesting is a couple of things. First, there must be exceptions to a process, especially if there are certain things that you can tick off that say, hey, this is worth jumping the line. We need to make sure that even if we have a queue established for this process of review, that there are some things that could be market impacting that need to jump to the front of the line. It could be that we are trying to be the first to market with a certain message, or we're trying to be first to market with a product or something like that. And if we don't move fast enough, we are not going to get the advantages we would need to have in order to get the broadest reach on whatever we are doing. So there's got to be some, you can have the process in place and explain that to everyone, but there's also got to be exceptions to that. And the minders, and I like to call them the process minders, there's always someone who owns the process, who is the overseer, who makes sure that people follows that process. Those minders sometimes, and if you are a minder, great. But if you are a minder and you don't realize and you don't see the forest for the trees, you're only looking at the tree and saying, hey, you're not following my process step by step by step. And you haven't seen the bigger scope of what we're trying to do and what we're trying to accomplish. You need to step back and take a look and see, is your process impeding the progress, or is it helping progress? And if it's impeding the progress, then we need to reevaluate that. You need to understand what are the exceptions to this process, because they must exist. Otherwise, we're not making progress. And if we're not making progress, we're probably going to be dead in the water. So I would suggest first, Make sure that there are exceptions to the process. If you are a senior level person managing this process under you and you have people who are managing that process for you, make sure they understand what the exceptions are that you will make for someone to jump the process while making sure all of the things that need to be taken care of are taken care of. Make sure your process minders know that there are exceptions and that they need to see the forest for the trees. If they don't understand the business value of why we need to jump the process to make progress, they need to understand that. And finally, review your processes from time to time. What I found at particularly large companies is that these processes have been around for eons. They were there sometimes from the beginning of time, and they have not undergone an examination to make sure that things are still relevant, that certain steps still need to be followed, that additional steps need to be incorporated, or that technology can help the process move faster. If there are things that people can do that make the process move faster, let's do that. If there are steps that can be eliminated, let's do that. Let's make the process work for the business and support the business. And I think all three of these tips can work for smaller companies as well as larger companies. Larger companies are great about process and control and all of that. Smaller companies, startups, they will start putting processes in place that will help the business. But if you always go into it with a thought of contributing to the business, seeing the forest for the trees, and being ready to take an input on things that are not working or that are working really well, you'll make sure that your processes are streamlined to support the business. Because at the end of the day, processes should not hinder business, they should be enhancing business. And sometimes we lose sight of that. So those are my tips. If you have any questions or you want to chat, hit me up on my website. I'm happy to discuss. I'll talk to you soon. Thanks. Bye-bye.